State Senator Joe Baldacci of Bangor has officially announced he's running for Maine's 2nd District congressional seat currently held by Representative Jared Golden. Baldacci enters a Democratic primary field that includes former congressional aide Jordan Wood and State Auditor Matt Dunlap. Louis Siegel and Paige Loud have also filed Federal Election Committee paperwork to run. When it comes to separating himself from the rest of the pack, Baldacci says he's leaning on his experience.
I don't come into this race thinking I'm running against somebody. I'm running for the office of representative based on my record of experience and also my record of winning elections. I think that is something that I offer that other candidates do not offer, and that I can win in November. But I am the only candidate in either race that's won an election in the last 10 years, and I'm the only candidate in either party that also has a significant legislative record for the last 6 or 7 years. So I think that we have fought for people in terms of healthcare, jobs, education. No one else really has that record.
The winner of this primary would most likely face Republican candidate and former Governor Paul LePage. In a response to Baldacci entering the race, LePage's political advisor said, quote, "Paul LePage survived homelessness. He is a successful job creator and served as a governor who cut taxes, lowered costs for Mainers, and protected health care by paying a hospital debt. He'll do the same in Congress, which is why Paul LePage has led every public poll since the race began," unquote.